Okay, let's unpack this. If you are preparing for a trip across the stars in this galaxy, you are not simply preparing for a journey through the cold, empty, predictable vacuum of space. You are preparing to sail across a boiling, roaring psychic ocean, a dimension made entirely of pure thought, raw emotion, and the collective subconscious of every sentient being in the galaxy.
What's fascinating here is that we aren't just discussing a location, we're discussing a mirror. The immaterium, or the warp, as it's more commonly known, is the psychic reflection of all existence. Every hope, every fear, every single moment of rage or joy instantly manifests as energy in this parallel dimension. Today, we are diving deep into the very substrate of the galaxy, the place where thoughts become reality and where the most terrifying foundational threats reside.
That's our mission. This deep dive is designed to give you the foundational knowledge you need to understand everything that defines life in the galaxy, from how faster-than-light travel is even possible to the pervasive, absolute fear of psychic power. We are going to explore this churning, volatile reality and understand how that reflection gave rise to beings of absolute, terrifying power, the four great ruinous powers, the Chaos Gods.
And crucially, we will detail the cataclysmic, pivotal event known as the Fall that made them the dominant existential threat to all galactic life. This isn't just lore, this is the cosmic architecture that dictates why chaos is humanity's greatest danger.
So let's start by grounding ourselves in the physics or the anti-physics of this dimension. We live in the physical universe, which is known as real space or the materium, but the warp is its chaotic parallel counterpart, a psychic shadow.
It is indeed a shadow, but one that actively influences the light. The warp is known by many names across the species of the galaxy. Warp space, the Empyrean, the Ether, the Sea of Souls, the Other Sea. Most accurately, though, it's known as the realm of chaos. It is a domain of pure energy, fundamentally without form, and because it is defined by emotion, the normal, reliable laws of time and space are simultaneously infinite and irrelevant there.
Okay, hold on. When you say infinite and irrelevant, that sounds like a philosophical abstract. Can you give us a tangible idea of what that means for, say, a traveler on a ship?
Certainly. In real space, movement is linear. It's predictable, point A to point B. In the warp, if your navigator miscalculates a jump, you might arrive at your destination 10 years after you departed, or perhaps 10 minutes before you departed.
Before. So time travel is on the table.
In a chaotic, uncontrollable way, yes. Or even worse, you arrive perfectly on time but find yourself 100 light years off course in the middle of hostile territory or just empty space. The flow is everything, and the flows are constantly shifting because they are powered by the galaxy's collective heartbeat.
And that leads us to the most critical conceptual point. The warp isn't a dead zone, it's an engine, and it runs entirely on fuel provided by us, the living.
That is the ultimate irony and the central mechanism of the threat. The warp's very existence, its density, its turbulence, is fueled entirely by the emotions and souls of all sentient beings in the materium. Every powerful human ambition, every orc's rage, every Eldari's hedonistic desire, it is immediately reflected back into this psychic dimension.
So it's like a pool where every drop of water is a feeling.
That's a great way to think about it. The more intense the feelings, the deeper and more turbulent the pool becomes. A moment of quiet contemplation might be a ripple. A world consumed by war is a tidal wave.
So, if the races of the galaxy were somehow cut off from the warp, if we all became emotionally blank, for example, what would happen to the entities that dwell there?
They would starve. Simple as that. The malevolent entities born there, including the great ruinous powers we will discuss, are completely dependent on the psychic energy we generate for their power and their continued existence. This fundamentally defines the conflict. It means they need us to feel and to suffer and to hope and to rage. They are psychic parasites that have grown into gods, and we are their infinite source of sustenance.
That ties directly into the fate of the soul, then. For most races, the warp is the final destination for deceased souls, and it's clearly not a peaceful transition.
No, it is a perilous journey, and one that often leads directly into the maws of predators. For a minimally psychic race like most humans, the soul just sort of swirls endlessly in the chaotic eddies of the Sea of Souls. It swiftly loses any sentience and just dissolves into the ambient energy.
And that's the best-case scenario.
That's the benign scenario. Worse still, many souls are immediately consumed by preying demons, which are drawn to the flash of passing spiritual energy like sharks to blood in the water. It is an end of total spiritual consumption and oblivion. This is why the few remaining Eldar, for example, go to such desperate lengths to protect their departed souls with specialized technology like spirit stones.
Now we come to the great paradox. This terrifying, volatile dimension, this realm of chaos, is simultaneously the key to galactic civilization. Without the warp, no stellar empire could exist.
Precisely. The warp is absolutely essential for long-distance interstellar travel, or FTL. Without it, you are limited to slow, sublight speeds. That means travel between star systems would take hundreds or even thousands of years. A galactic empire is impossible under those conditions.
So spacecraft use these warp drives to create a bubble, which allows them to enter warp space and, bypass the normal restrictions of real space physics.
Exactly. It lets them traverse light years in what can be relatively short periods.
You mentioned an analogy earlier, the stream. Let's expand on that so we can really get our heads around the mechanism.
Of course. If you imagine real space as the solid, motionless banks of a river, the warp is the fast-flowing water itself. Because the dimensions are adjacent, the warp is compressed and fluid. When a ship enters the warp, it's not truly moving through space in the conventional sense, but rather is being carried along by the currents of psychic energy. A single meter traveled in the warp might translate to vast distances, light years even, in the materium.
But the stream isn't a straight line.
Not at all. It's filled with whirlpools, rapids, and dead zones. And that is the danger.
Right, and since the environment is pure chaos, you can't navigate by looking at stars or relying on some kind of galactic GPS. So how do vessels actually chart a path through this boiling ocean?
This is where specialized support comes in, which highlights humanity's immense vulnerability. Journeys are unpredictable, and the chaotic nature requires extreme caution. The primary method of navigation relies on navigators. These are an entirely specialized sub-race of humans, psychically mutated over millennia, who possess a third eye.
A literal third eye.
A literal third eye that allows them to perceive the currents of the warp. They can see the psychic tides. They are the only ones capable of safely steering a ship through the turbulent flows by tracking the Astronomicon, which is the Emperor's psychic beacon projected from Terra.
So if the navigators are psychic, that means they are particularly attuned to the very dimension they are navigating. Does that make them especially vulnerable to the things in the warp?
It makes them the ultimate target. Their mind is the closest interface between the materium and the immaterium. But they aren't the only protection required. When a ship enters the warp, it must be shielded by what's called a Geller field.
We hear Geller field mentioned constantly. Can you clarify what it is and why it is absolutely 100% non-negotiable for FTL travel?
A Geller field is a localized, complex, psychic force field projected by a specialized device on the vessel. Its purpose is to create a small, stable bubble of real space reality within the hostile environment of the warp. It's like a submarine's hull, but for reality itself.
And if it fails?
If it fails, even for a second, the ship and everyone inside would instantly be subject to the physics or anti-physics of the immaterium. Crew members would be consumed, their bodies twisted into impossible shapes. The ship itself would melt or become a living, screaming nightmare dimension. The very structure of reality would just break down.
The warp is hostile to material creatures, and it is also home to its own forms of life. We often hear lists of bizarre entities, vampire, Seknoan, astral specter. But are they the main problem, or is something else the greatest threat?
Those creatures are dangerous, certainly. And they are drawn to the psychic emanations of mortals in real space, always scratching at the Geller fields, eager to get in. But they are, for lack of a better term, just wildlife. They are minor hazards compared to the demons of chaos. Demons are the most numerous and terrifying denizens of the warp. They are fragmented aspects of the Chaos gods themselves, given transient form by the intensity of the warp and the wills of their masters.
So their strength is tied to the warp's turbulence.
Exactly. When the warp is calm, they are weak, almost dormant. When the warp is turbulent, they are legion.
And speaking of turbulence, we move from individual creatures to cosmic catastrophes.
Roar.
Warp storms and warp rifts.
Yes. When the emotions fueling the warp reach a fever pitch, these disturbances can become raging storms of incomprehensibly destructive fury, and they can last for centuries. These are not merely weather systems, they are pure psychic trauma manifested as a physical force. And they're often tied to warp rifts, tears in the fabric of reality that link the warp directly to the materium.
So a hole between dimensions.
A gaping wound. And when a rift occurs, the very realm of chaos spills into our reality. The most famous of these, the Eye of Terror and the Maelstrom, are essentially permanent scars on the galaxy, allowing demons unfettered access to real space. It is a constant reminder that this necessary travel mechanism is truly chaos made manifest.
So now that we have established that the warp is this giant emotional feedback mechanism, we can address the central mystery. How did four distinct intelligent entities arise from that, that soup of everything?
They weren't born fully formed, that's the key. We know that in the early history of the galaxy, the powers of the warp were indistinct.
So it wasn't always this divided, this chaotic.
Not in the same way. Imagine the Sea of Souls as a murky river. Initially, all the emotions flowed together: love, hate, peace, war, a relatively calm, unified psychic stream. But as mortal races grew and prospered across the vastness of the cosmos, their emotions strengthened. Crucially, their negative, strong, or obsessive emotions began to be expressed collectively and exponentially. This started to fuel specific currents in the river.
And that collective power began to give shape to these abstract currents.
Exactly. As billions upon billions of creatures experienced rage, that rage energy coalesced into a single psychic point. As billions of creatures plotted and hoped for a different future, their ambition coalesced into another. These four distinct currents grew strong enough to act independently of the general emotional flow. They became sentient entities. They became self-aware.
And at that point, they realized they could not only feed on emotion, but actually demand it.
Correct. This is the terrifying feedback loop we mentioned. They reached into the minds and dreams of mortals, demanding praise, worship, and servitude to strengthen themselves. The more an emotion is exhibited, whether in pure thought or violent physical action, the stronger that corresponding god becomes. They're eternally seeking to amplify their core emotion through their followers.
The philosophical horror is that we are the architects of our own destruction. These gods are just our own amplified flaws.
Precisely. And their ascension to consciousness was not simultaneous. This chronology is vital to understanding galactic history.
Right, because they didn't all just pop into existence at the same time.
No. The first three great powers, Khorne, the god of slaughter, Tynch, the god of schemes, and Nurgle, the god of death, became sapient by the end of M2. That's the second millennium of galactic history, corresponding roughly to Terra's Middle Ages.
Which tells us that the most ancient, primal, and unavoidable mortal conditions warfare, the desire for change and the inevitability of decay, were the first to achieve consciousness in the warp.
That's right. These are basic, universal experiences. But Slaanesh was much, much later.
A lot later.
Slaanesh was the last and most violent birth, fully awakening much later, in M29. We will detail this catastrophic moment later, but the takeaway for now is that Slaanesh required a specialized, sophisticated level of extreme excess and decadence to fuel its creation. It was an emotion that really only arose when a dominant species had reached the absolute peak of technological and spiritual self-indulgence.
So we have four distinct entities, all feeding on mortal souls and ambitions. Logically, shouldn't they team up to consume the galaxy faster? I mean, it seems like the smart play.
If they were logical, perhaps. But they are pure emotion, and pure emotion breeds conflict. They are perpetual rivals, locked in what is known as the Great Game. It's an eternal internal war within the warp itself. They're all vying for total domination of the immaterium and eventually real space.
But total power cannot be shared.
Exactly. Their domains fundamentally contradict each other. Khorne despises Tynch's magic and subtlety. Tynch despises Nurgle's stagnation and acceptance of fate. Khorne absolutely loathes Slaanesh's self-indulgence. This constant internal friction acts as a cosmic deadlock. It's ironically the one thing preventing any one of them from ever achieving absolute, unchallenged victory across the materium.
So they're endless war mirrors and fuels the conflict between their followers in the material universe. Every mortal battle is essentially a scoring system for one of the ruinous powers.
A literal arms race fueled by mortal suffering. Victory in battle, a successful political scheme, the spread of a new plague, or the successful pursuit of a dangerous exotic pleasure. All of it lends more power to the relevant god, intensifying the entire cycle of suffering and ambition.
Here's where we move from the abstract mechanism to the specific monomaniacal focus of these vast beings. We need to look at what they represent, philosophically, and how their singular drive shapes their actions. Let's start with the one whose motivations are perhaps the most straightforward. Khorne, the blood god.
Khorne represents the raw, unrestrained essence of anger, violence, hate, warfare, bloodshed, slaughter, and indiscriminate killing. He is the first, the Lord of Rage, the Taker of Skulls. His existence is pure distilled fury.
The core insight into Khorne is that he cares only about the act of violence, not the reason behind it. It's not about good versus evil for him.
That is the defining feature. Khorne cares not from where the blood flows, only that it flows freely. Subtlety, planning, magical rituals, diplomacy, all of it is meaningless artifice to him. An insult. His followers are fundamentally warriors who worship him exclusively on the battlefield. The act of shedding blood, whether in victory or defeat, empowers him. Woe betide the worshipper who builds an elaborate, beautiful temple instead of taking up a weapon and shedding blood, for that dedication to artifice would incur his immediate wrath.
And his aesthetic, his imagery is a reflection of this brutal simplicity.
Completely. He is consistently depicted as gargantuan, massively muscular, often with a snarling, hound-like face, clad in brass and iron armor. He sits upon the master of the brazen throne, which is itself placed atop a mountain of bleached skulls. And this isn't just a metaphor. This skull mountain is literal. It's composed of the remains of all who've been slain in his name, including his own champions who failed him. It is constantly growing higher in a lake of gore.
This simple, brutal focus creates a profound tension within the great game.
Absolutely. His disdain for magic means he despises Sanch, the greatest sorcerer, but his deepest, most visceral hatred is reserved for Slaanesh. Khorne views Slaanesh's self-indulgent sensualities, the pursuit of pleasure for its own sake, as insulting and entirely antithetical to his principles of raw, uncontrolled violence and fury. To him, Slaanesh's existence is a distraction from the only true passion: bloodshed.
And his sacred number, 8, permeates every facet of his existence, from the towers surrounding his citadel to the structure of his legions. What about his demons, the blood legions?
They are melee personified. The greater demons are the bloodthirsters, magnificent archetypes of demons fashioned from pure, destructive rage. They're often seen wielding massive two-headed battle axes and fiery whips. The common foot soldiers are the bloodletters, anger given transient form, charging heedlessly into battle wielding blood-drinking hellblades. And to enable their rapid assaults, they utilize juggernauts, massive demonic steeds made from living demonic metal resembling gigantic rhinoceroses. They are terrifyingly efficient at straightforward slaughter.
Okay, so moving from straightforward slaughter to schemes of incomprehensible complexity, let's pivot to Tzeentch, the changer of the ways.
Tzeentch is the god of the volatility and necessity of change. Magic, hope, ambition, scheming, plotting, prophecy, and mutation. If Khorne is the god of the instant, Tzeentch is the god of the long-term convoluted plan. His power is sustained by the desire for change, that spark of wishing for a better tomorrow, and the endless scheming that accompanies ambitious ascent.
So he's not just fueled by dark intentions, but by genuine, positive hope for change. That seems counterintuitive.
That's the critical paradox of Tzeentch. The desire to improve, to alter destiny, to achieve success that feeds him, regardless of whether the initial ambition was noble or malicious. Every political plot, every academic quest for forbidden knowledge, every ambitious climb up the social ladder fuels his power. He is the ultimate puppet master because he is aware of all these plans all at once.
He perceives the future by being aware of all that is planned and all that may potentially happen, essentially viewing fate as a malleable document.
Exactly. He is the greatest magician in the warp, and his title, the Great Conspirator, is well earned. He interferes constantly, directly and indirectly, in the fates of all things. But if you try to observe his grand schemes, they look utterly chaotic and contradictory. His ultimate goals are so far-reaching and complicated that only he perceives the full possibilities of his actions. He might orchestrate the death of an arch-enemy, only to resurrect that enemy's most insignificant lieutenant, because that lieutenant's minor actions decades later will cause the specific change he requires.
It's pure chaos theory, the butterfly effect as a theology.
A perfect description. His imagery reflects this sense of instability and complex analysis. He is a being of constant flux. His skin is constantly shifting and rolling, covered in faces that leer, repeat, or analyze his words as he speaks. You can never trust what you hear because the meaning is always filtered through 1,000 contradictory psychic reflections. Raw, magical energy surrounds him like smoke, highlighting his role as the master of sorcery.
In the Great Game, his diametric opposite has to be the god of inevitable decay.
Nurgle, yes. Tzeentch derives power from the will to change destiny. Nurgle represents despair and the acceptance of one's fate. This rivalry is constant and defining. Tzeentch seeks to accelerate evolution and progress. Nurgle seeks to conserve and decay. Tzeentch's sacred number is 9, woven into his entire realm. From his legions to the number of dimensions travelers are forced to view simultaneously in his domain.
And his domain, the maze of Tzeentch, is a reflection of his own convoluted mind.
The maze, or the crystal labyrinth, is an immaterial prison woven from raw magic, deceit, and conspiracy. It doesn't trap you with physical barriers. It traps you with overcomplexity. It forces travelers to view all 9 dimensions simultaneously, which quickly drives them to insanity. At the heart of this labyrinth stands the impossible fortress, a place where time, space, and gravity cease to exist, and where the change of the ways plots eternally in the hidden library. His demons, the scintillating legions, include the avian lords of change, winged humanoids of vast psychic power, and the common horrors, who are shifting masses of flesh, launching magical fire, fighting in bizarre, chaotic carnivals of sorcerous violence. Our third power, Nurgle, the great lord of decay, embodies the concept of inevitable entropy.
Nurgle is the chaos god of despair, decay, disease, mortality, and morbidity. He is often regarded as the lord of all because nothing, no matter how powerful or beautiful, is immune to physical corruption. That grand palace today is tomorrow's ruin. That great hope is the foundation of future regret. Decay always wins. But the philosophical depth here is not just death. It is the acceptance of decay, which gives him this strange, almost benign quality.
That is the central paradox. His power is drawn from the living's fear of inevitable death and disease, but he mitigates that fear by offering comfort within suffering. He grants relief from physical pain and leads to a strange, monstrous self-satisfaction. If you accept the rot, you no longer fear it. This twisted sense of comfort is why he is so paternalistically referred to by his followers as Grandfather Nurgle or Papa Nurgle. He is the most actively involved with mortals, eager to shower them with his gifts of disease.
It is so jarring to contrast his grotesquely bloated, corrupted appearance with the seemingly jovial nature of his followers and his demons.
They exhibit a disturbing joy at the pestilence, viewing his plagues as a sign of his affection. Nurgle himself is massive and putrid, foul-colored with necrotic, leathery skin, yet he maintains this strange, gregarious sentimentality.
And how does this acceptance of inevitability play out against his chief rival, Tsinch?
Nurgle's followers thwart Tsinch's complex, ambitious scheme simply through inertia. They promote dull-minded conservationisms, knowing that Tsinch's grand plans are inevitably fleeting. Whatever survives entropy, whatever breaks down, whatever simply stops struggling for change, it ultimately becomes Nurgle's domain. It's a battle between relentless stagnation and perpetual movement. Nurgle's sacred number is 7.
His realm, the Garden of Nurgle, is a horrifying perversion of a paradise.
It is a macabre, pestilential realm, always moist and foul, where everything is simultaneously dying and grotesquely thriving with disease-ridden life. Twisted, rotten boughs cover the moldering ground. At its heart resides Nurgle's mansion of rotted timbers, where he toils at a cauldron vast enough to contain all the oceans of the galaxy.
And the anecdote about his eternal prisoner, the Eldar goddess Isha, captures the unique brand of cosmic cruelty Nurgle employs.
It speaks volumes about his character. Isha, the Eldar goddess of healing, is kept captive in a cage next to his cauldron. Nurgle, the god of disease, force-feeds her his latest plagues to test their potency. Because she is a goddess of healing, she can cure herself, but then Nurgle just tests a new, worse plague on her. This cycle is eternal.
That's horrific.
The profound irony is that occasionally, while Nurgle is distracted, Isha whispers instructions to mortals on how to cure themselves of his poxes, offering a tiny, fragile spark of hope in the face of his overwhelming despair.
Let's quickly review his demons, the Plague Legions.
The Great Unclean Ones are massive, bloated, greater demons, acting as grotesque, beloved facsimiles of Nurgle himself. They're often called Papa by their underlings. The common demons are the Plague Bearers, often called the Tallymen of Nurgle. They constantly strive to number the poxes they spread, a bizarre, futile attempt to impose order on a universe of chaos, mirroring the mortal mind's need to quantify suffering. A single scratch from their rusted swords bestows a fatal plague. Finally, the Nurglings are miniature, mischievous, friendly representations of Nurgle who attack in vast, venomous swarms.
Finally, we arrive at the newest and perhaps most dangerous chaos god, born from the heights of aesthetic and hedonistic excess, Slaanesh, the Prince of Excess.
Slaanesh, also known to the Eldar as Salanthresh or She Who Thirsts, is the chaos god of lust, greed, excess, pain, pleasure, perfection, and hedonism. It represents the drive to fulfill every desire and push beyond all limits, whether that limit is physical, emotional, or moral. Slaanesh is the obsession with perfection taken to the point of utter self-destruction.
The aesthetic is critical here. It's a blend of unholy beauty and terror.
Slaanesh is typically depicted as a beautiful, lithe, androgynous figure, often female on the right side and male on the left, with 2 sets of horns rising from golden hair. It can, however, assume any form, male, female, asexual, whatever, will best capture the eye or soul of the one observing it. Its sacred number is 6, and its followers often wear exotic jewelry with erotic motifs, rather than displaying the symbol openly.
The worship of Slaanesh is about the relentless pursuit of sensation, not just simple pleasure. It's about extremity.
It's the drive for more. Followers engage in a totally hedonistic lifestyle. pursuing the most exquisite and exotic pleasures imaginable, often involving extreme sensation, both pleasure and pain, to achieve a momentary, intense high. This obsession permeates every aspect of their existence. Militant followers, for instance, don't just fortify their hideouts with weapons, they stock them with luxurious furniture, sumptuous food, exotic tapestries, and erotic decorations.
Yeah.
The pursuit of perfection, even in logistics or brutality, becomes an end in itself.
The rivalry with Horn is strongest here because they represent two different philosophies of destruction.
Khorne seeks raw, indiscriminate destruction. Slaanesh seeks refined, exquisite sensation. Khorne's principle of pain and death as an end clashes violently with Slaanesh's principle of using pain and pleasure as a means to achieve unrestricted sensation. Slaanesh views Khorne as crude and unsophisticated. Slaanesh is generally neutral toward the others, too caught up in its own pleasures and obsessions to engage fully in Saint's games or Nurgle's stagnations.
What awaits those who dare Slaanesh's realm?
The Palace of Slaanesh is a realm of warped delights. Those who enter risk being trapped in a cycle of exquisite physical and spiritual indulgence for eternity. It is the ultimate expression of unfulfilled desire, forever just out of reach.
And finally, the legions of excess.
These demons are characterized by speed, lethality, and a horrifying distorted elegance. The greater demons are the keepers of secrets, possessing an unholy, disturbing beauty and vast terror, commanding the legions with speed unequaled by the other gods' forces. The common demons are the demonettes, disturbingly beautiful, often androgynous, who attack with incredible swiftness, usually possessing crab-like claws or elongated razor-sharp nails for delivering exquisite pain.
If we connect this detailed philosophical structure to the bigger picture, we have to look at Slaanesh's birth. The formation of the Chaos Gods wasn't a slow background process. Slaanesh's awakening was tied to a singular, cataclysmic historical event that literally tore the galaxy open.
Yes. This is the moment chaos became the dominant, overriding threat to all galactic life.
This begins with the Eldar Empire, the galaxy's undisputed masters for millennia. We need to set the scene. What was their dominance like?
Following the terrible conflicts of the War in Heaven, where the ancient Old Ones fought the Necrotyr and the vampiric C'tan, which led to the creation of the mechanical Necrons, a power vacuum emerged. The Eldar rose to dominion, establishing the empire of 10 million suns. They were psychically potent, technologically supreme, and used the webway, a dimension-spanning network of tunnels, for instant travel. They pushed all lesser races to the fringes, including nascent humanity and the orcs.
So they had it all, basically, a true utopia. They had surpassed the need for physical labor, relying on sophisticated technology and spirit drones. They had centuries-long lifespans. What was their spiritual state during this era?
It was relatively stable. The warp was active, but not overtly hostile to them. When Eldar died, their powerful soul dissolved peacefully into the warp to be reborn, a natural cycle. There was no fear of consumption or eternal torture. They were powerful psychically, but their collective restraint meant their massive emotional output was contained.
But centuries of complete leisure and a lack of purpose led to something terrifying: boredom.
Boredom combined with immense psychic power is the most dangerous combination in the galaxy. Having satisfied all physical needs, the Eldar slowly succumbed to pride, hedonism, and the need to push the boundaries of sensation. They began indulging their darkest impulses in the pursuit of unique experiences.
This wasn't just a few rogue elements, but a systemic societal collapse driven by these pleasure cults.
Yes, pleasure cults, dedicated to esoteric knowledge and extreme sensual excess, sprang up across their hundreds of paradise worlds. The societal structure broke down. This became institutionalized cruelty. Brother fought brother. Eldar feasted upon each other, and their psychic energy became increasingly dark, obsessive, and sadistic. This collective, massive vice unknowingly fed a single, rapidly growing psychic entity in the warp, the shadow of what the Eldar race had become.
The ultimate self-fulfilling prophecy. They literally created their greatest enemy through their own flaws.
They fueled Slaanesh, the ultimate consumer of excess. And when Slaanesh finally matured in M29, the psychic eruption was cataclysmic. Slaanesh's birth cry was a psionic scream of such immense power that it was felt across the entire galaxy.
Tell us about the immediate consequences of that birth, the fall of the Eldar.
The spirits of billions of Eldar, concentrated at the core of their empire, were violently torn from their bodies and immediately sucked into the warp, destined for eternal torture at the hands of the god they had created. Slaanesh consumed almost the entire Eldar pantheon in that moment. The gods were unable to defend themselves against the entity that represented their civilization's moral failure. Only the laughing god, Sigurok, survived by hiding in the webway, and the goddess Isha was taken captive by Nurgle, as we discussed.
And the physical evidence of this cosmic trauma remains today, providing the Chaos Gods with their primary gateway into the Materium.
The epicenter of this psychic implosion, where the Eldar homeworlds were concentrated, was instantly transformed into the Eye of Terror. This is the massive, permanent warp rift that links the realm of chaos directly to real space. It is a permanent scar, constantly leaking corruption and demons into the physical universe. The few surviving Eldar, those on craft worlds or those who had already fled into the webway, are now a scattered race, forever hunted by she who thirsts.
The greatest irony in galactic history, however, is that this cataclysmic self-destruction had one staggering, unintentional benefit for humanity.
The Eldar's self-annihilation violently cleared the table for humanity. The Age of Strife, a long, dark period where humanity was barred from interstellar travel because massive, violent warp storms made FTL impossible, was instantly ended.
The sheer violence of Slaanesh's birth somehow temporarily calmed the most violent ancient warp storms.
Correct. The psychic implosion stabilized the warp just enough to allow reliable FTL travel again. This allowed the Emperor of Mankind to launch his Great Crusade, uniting disparate human colonies and rising to dominance. But, and this is the critical point, it was only possible because the Eldar had destroyed themselves and, in doing so, unleashed the ultimate conscious evil upon the galaxy. Humanity achieved stellar travel stability only after the warp had become the true realm of chaos, ensuring their existence would forever be defined by the enemies the Eldar created.
So what does this all mean for us, the listeners, as we try to understand the nature of the galaxy? The very forces that make interstellar travel possible, the immaterium, are simultaneously the greatest existential threat, born entirely from the unchecked, amplified, and mirrored emotions of sentient life.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the history of the galaxy shows us that the biggest threats aren't external invasions. They are internal corruption driven by the passions we think make us strong. The warp demonstrates that emotion is a literal, tangible weapon. The Chaos Gods Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh are defined by their singular monomaniacal focus, and they were completely dependent on us mortals for their power and continued existence. They are the psychic vampires of our own flaws.
And understanding their foundational rivalry, the Great Game, helps us understand why this struggle against chaos is eternal and complex. It's not a unified front. It's four fundamental, contradictory human drives fighting each other for dominance, using mortal suffering as currency.
This struggle is endless, because the contradictory passions, the desire for change versus the acceptance of fate or indiscriminate violence versus refined pleasure, are fundamental to sentient life. As long as there are mortals, these entities will have power, and they will fight each other.
Before we wrap up, consider this final provocative thought for you to explore on your own. The Chaos Gods reflect the core emotional landscape of M2 and M29. But the Imperium of Man, in its current state, is a civilization defined by highly paradoxical, complex, modern struggles. An oppressive bureaucracy, a stagnant faith in technology, constant despair mixed with defiant, militaristic self-sacrifice. Given that the warp absorbs everything, what kind of new, currently nameless chaos god might be slowly gestating in the Immaterium today, specifically fueled by the contradictory, complex emotions of the Imperium's current age, like perhaps the despair of stifled innovation or the rage of stifled bureaucracy?